All right, so a couple things. Head on, are we able to get the projector up? Are you able to see my monitor? All right, cool. So, oh, Bosh, may you do me a favor? All right, so shalom, family.
Shalom.
All right, so real quick, this class won't be too long. So it'll be a series of classes that need to be done to cover everything, but we're going to get a little bit of history. So I'm opening up my portfolio, my wonderful water portfolio, and start off a little bit of information. So today's lesson is Once Upon a Time in Egypt. So this is going to be part one, and we're going to cover a few things. Let's get started. All right, Egypt, and let's get with a couple of things that you may hear when people discuss Egypt. You hear a lot of different rumors and a lot of different, I would say, sayings that they kind of have against why the Bible isn't to be believed when it comes down to your conscious community or Kemetic followers or Egyptologists, things of that nature. So let's get started with a few of those. So one commonality you may hear is the terminology of Egypt itself is one in which they a lot of times don't subscribe to the word Egypt. So they subscribe to what a lot of time that you hear? You have something? What's a lot of times you hear them say? We're Kemet. You know, they don't use that word Egypt a lot. A lot of times they use the word Kemet, right? So even when they use that word Kemet, they're still subscribing to the Bible. And we'll get as to why. So let's get Egypt etymology. So this is the first one. When the word Kemet is used, you are subscribing to the Bible. Let's get the etymology. So when you read this, Egypt, you get, and this is from Online Etymology Dictionary. So Egypt, Old English, Egypti, the Egyptians, from French, Egypt, from Greek, Egyptos. So that's what you're getting with, all right? Egyptos. That's where it comes from. It comes from the Greek. Why is that? Because the Greeks are the ones who named it Egypt. Why? In which we'll deal into. Egypt means, or Egyptos, the river Nile, Egypt. From Amarna, Hekapta, corresponding to Egyptian, Hekapta, temple of the soul of Ptah. So the creative god associated with Memphis, the ancient city of Egypt. That's what you're dealing with. So strictly one of the names of Memphis, it was taken by the Greeks as the name of the whole country. So the Greeks are the ones, when they conquered the land, they took the whole region or country to mean or to name Egypt. That's what you were dealing with. So now, situation goes, let me see if I get this up. Okay, I'm good, I got it. So now, situation goes, go back to screen, Maricine. Yeah, it went blank. So now, situation goes, they had took it and named the whole country, the whole area, Egypt, after the people, which the name wasn't even Egypt, the name was actually something else. And so we'll actually get what that name actually was. So I'm gonna go here, and I'm going to exit the program, get it back up. Real quick. All right, there we go, back up. All right, so now, they named the whole area Egypt, and it says strictly one of the names of Memphis, it was taken by the Greeks as the name of the whole country. The Egyptian name Kemet, as you hear, means a black country, possibly in reference to the rich delta soil. The Arabic is Mizir, which is derived from Mitzrayim, the name of a soul, and the name of a son of biblical Ham. So that's what you'll have. So now when you're dealing with Kemet, you're dealing with Kim, dealing with Kam, you're dealing with Ham. That's what you're dealing with. You're dealing with his descendant. But as far as the actual name of that region, you're dealing with Mitzrayim. So we'll get more so as to why. All right, so Egypt, this is from ancient.eu. Egypt is a country in North Africa on the Mediterranean Sea. It is among the oldest civilizations on Earth. The name Egypt comes from the Greek Egyptos, which was the Greek pronunciation of the Egyptian name Hakapta, which means house of the spirit of Ptah, just like we read from similar on Etymology or etymine.com. So now the pronunciation of the word or the name Hakapta, which means house of spirit of Ptah, who was a very early god of the ancient Egyptians. In the early Old Kingdom, Egypt was simply known as Kemet, which means black land. So was all the other land of that region was known as Kemet. So now, it also says, so named for the rich dark soil along the Nile River, where the first settlements began. Later the country was known simply as Mizr, which means country, a name still in use by Egyptians for their nation in the present day. So we'll get in why Mizr. Mizr, as we dealt with on etymology, online etymology dictionary, the Arabic is Mizr, which is derived from Mitzrayim, the name of a son of biblical Ham. So Mitzrayim, this is from the Zondervan Compact Bible Dictionary. So it says Mitzrayim, son of Ham. You get Genesis 10, 6, 13, 1 Chronicles 1 and 8 and 11, the progenitor of Egyptians. So when you're looking at the Egyptians were a race or nation of Hamitic people or Kemetic people. So it wasn't everybody. So a lot of times when you deal with a lot of people in the conscious community, they make it seem as if we're just all Egyptian. We're just all, Egypt, when that's not the case. And even then, when you say Kemet or you say Cam, you're pretty much dealing with Ham, you're dealing with all Africans. Well, all Africans aren't Egyptian. Egypt is one of the families, or Mitzrayim is one of the families of Egypt, but they're not all Egyptian, all right? So now, let's continue on. Genesis 10 and 1. You can go ahead and read that. Genesis chapter 10 and verse 1.
Genesis chapter 10, verse 1. Now these are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and unto them were sons born after the flood.
Right, so that's what you're dealing with. You're dealing with after the flood did this civilization come about. And coming from the descendants of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, coming from the descendant of Ham or lineage of Ham. Now skip down and read verse 6.
Verse 6, and the sons of Ham.
So the sons of who?
And the sons of Ham.
So the sons of Ham, the sons of Cam, or Cam, but Cam, these are Kemetic or Kemetic. Continue.
Cush and Mizraim.
So Mizraim, that would be Egypt right there. Read.
And Phut and Canaan.
Let's go ahead. So now, Ham, like what do you see right there at the bottom? You see Cam. It says hot, Cam, or Kim, or Ham. So son of Noah, also as a patronymic, his descendants of their country. Ham, that's the country you're dealing with. So that whole region, as we would have here. Let me go back, and let's go back to another photo that I have. Let's go to history. Jerusalem, mother of us all, and let's look at this area here. This is why I deal with the country or the region. This is the whole region of the whole Kemetic region, that whole area of Ham. That's that whole Kemetic region that we're dealing with. So these were all the African people of this particular area. So that's what you're dealing with, all right? And so as you can see, Mitzrayim is right there in that area. All right, that's where they dwelt. So now let's go back to Egypt, and we are going back to etymology. All right, so now, picking right up. So now Mitzrayim, as we see here, Mitzrayim, it gives you the same concordance definition in the same word. Mitzrayim, H4714. So it says dual of H4693, Mitzrayim, Upper and Lower Egypt. So Egypt, Egyptians, Mitzrayim. So it's all connected. Then I don't need that. All right, that's it for etymology. So first thing we covered, etymology of Egypt. The word Egypt itself is Greek. So it was brought forth by the Greeks who took an area, a city of Egypt, that city being Memphis, and named the whole area Egypt due, to the Nile, all right? So, but the word comes from Kemet, and the word for Egypt itself is Mitzrayim, and the word Cam comes from the Bible, comes from one of the sons of Noah, all right? So it comes from the word Ham. So people saying Kemet or Cam, they're dealing with Ham, all right? So when they're saying Egypt in particular, Egypt is one of the sons of Ham, is Mitzrayim, all right? Mitzrayim, or Mitzrayim. All right, so that covers one. The next one that's very popular is dealing with the Bible is plagiarized. The commandments were taken from the 42 laws of Ma'at. All right, let's kind of get into that. So, who's Ma'at? Ma'at refers to ancient Egyptian concepts of truth, balance, order, harmony, law, morality, and justice. Ba was also the goddess who personified these concepts and regulated the stars, seasons, and the actions of mortals and the deities who had brought order from chaos at the moment of creation. Her ideology opposite was Isfet, meaning injustice, chaos, violence, or to do evil. Let's get a little more info. So you may hear a lot of the 42 principles of Ma'at, 42 confessions, admonitions, ideals, things of that nature. Negative confessions, admonitions, declarations of innocence, things of that nature. But let's get a little more into it. So this is from ma'atlaws.blogspot.com. And let's read what it says at the bottom. So down toward the bottom, as I zoom in, you see where it says, the purpose of Ma'at, law, justice, truth, among the Kemet, so notice that word, people of ancient Upper and Lower Egypt was to divert chaos, Isfet. In Spellbook, chapter 125 of the Papyrus of Ani, keep that in mind, the Papyrus of Ani, also Book of Coming Forth by Day, or the Egyptian Book of the Dead, as edited by E.A. Wallace Budge. We're going to get into that, all right? So remember that name, E.A. Wallace Budge, all right? So famous Egyptologist. So remember those three things, the Papyrus of Ani, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, and E.A. Wallace Budge. All right, moving on. So, reason being is because the 42 laws of Ma'at are linked to the Papyrus of Ani. So, the Book of the Dead, the Papyrus of Ani, in the British Museum. The Egyptian text with interlinear transliteration and translation. So remember, to transliterate anything is to take the closest corresponding characters that make up that particular name or title and put as closely as you can into the language that you're trying to make it so that it sounds almost identical, all right? So in a translate is to take it from one language to the next to make sure I convey the same meaning of what it is I'm trying to convey, but may not necessarily sound or look anything the same. All right, so this is a running translation, introduction, etc. by E.A. Wallace Budge. See that name again. So late keeper of Assyrian and Egyptian antiquities in the British Museum, 1895. So this is a picture of this particular Edomite. And this is a picture of the book, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the Papyrus of Ani. So Egyptian text, transliteration, translation by E.A. Wallace Budge. So one of the point of reference of this is where a lot of your conscious community is going to learn this information is going to be from this man. So this Edomite man who wrote this book. So they're going to learn this, from him. Although he did not create these words, he transliterated and translated it, but they're learning from his writings. So now, when you look at the British Museum, and this is a picture, which I'll highlight for you more, of that papyrus, let's get a few details from it. So, one, the description, Book of the Dead. This is where the Book of the Dead comes from. The Book of the Dead comes from the Papyrus of Ani. And on the Papyrus of Ani, you have the 42 laws or confessions of Ma'at, all right? So Ani's judgment, the scene is the hall of judgment. Centrally placed is a balance, holding in its two pans Ani's heart on the left and a feather on the right, representing Ma'at, the divine personification of truth and order. The crossbar of the balance hangs from a feather-shaped peg attached to the upright support on the top. So now, notice the date. The date is about 1250 BC, circa 1250 BC. That's when generally they're saying these things date back to, these things were actually made, written, so on and so forth. All right, keep that date in mind. Because one of the things that you'll find is that with it, that is actually very late to have, because remember, the biggest thing that they tout is that these laws or originals, they pretty much foundated the laws and government and order. You have different ones that say that. But nevertheless, these things actually come after Israel. And then, mind you, that's only one side of the argument, because one can easily deal with the fact of the matter is that all these laws and systems were taken from what it is that we learned, which wasn't necessarily something that's just strictly scriptural, but what it is that the Most High taught Adam, and Adam taught his descendants, you know, Noah being one of those descendants, and then being a situation where Noah taught his sons, and his sons taught their sons, which were Hamitic people, and which were Egyptians, so that's where they got it from. They got it like how we got it from the Most High. They just changed and altered the things that they didn't like. And we made sure that we wrote it down just as they made certain changes and wrote it down. So that's where if you want to get technical, but at the end of the day, if you just want to chop it all the way down to Israel as a people, well, that's easy. And we'll get more of the information later on because, like I said, notice the date, 1250 BC. We're going to hold that. We're going to come right back to this, and we're going to get a couple other things. Let's go down furthermore into my little history book, and we're going to get some Israelite archaeology. So now, remember I told you hold that date. Let's get Israelites existed or exist. A couple things we're going to get is around that time, because people like to deal with that the Israelites came about much later, much later. They try to put them in the new kingdom as far as chronology or time is concerned. Let me actually get that real quick. Go back to Egypt. Let me go to chronology, or better yet, yeah, we go to chronology. So we'll get a couple of different things. So many people try to go ahead and put, actually better yet, I'll get you with the Egyptian pharaohs. Put it right down here. Oh, also, when you're dealing with this period, like I said, the Ptolemaic period and things of that nature with Alexander the Great, so which is really the Greek, you're dealing with Greek rule here, which when they conquered this area, that's when you deal with Alexandria, or the Alexandrian library. That came because the Greeks conquered that particular area. So many people that argue like Cleopatra was really a Edomite. She was actually a Greek. She was a Edomite. So she wasn't even black, so come to think about it, So more research on that later on, but moving right along. All right, so let's backdate. All right, so this is where many people put, the Exodus. So because many people put the Exodus here, things of that nature, they put it with Ramses the First. They say, well, Israelites, came much later, and that our law system, dates back prior, things of that nature, when that's not necessarily true. When they take it from the Book of the Dead or the Papyrus of Ani, that's not necessarily true, because that dates back to 1250 BC, when at the end of the day, us as Israel, which we're going to get back to Israelite archaeology, and we're going to go back to the Israelites exist. And we're going to get a couple of references, all right? So get a couple of references. One is the Merneptah stele. So Merneptah stele is important because it deals with Israel is wasted. Its seed is not, all right? And this is 1205 BC. But now the key thing about this is Israel was already a nation and recognized as a nation. So the Merneptah stele, also known as the Israel stele or stela, or victory stele of Merneptah, is an inscription that ancient Egyptian king Merneptah, reign was 1213 to 1203, discovered by Flinders Petrie. We'll remember that name. We'll come back to it later. So maybe not even in this particular episode. So in 1896 at Thebes, and now housed in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, record the war victories of King Merneptah of Egypt. Merneptah ruled over Egypt in the late 13th century BC. The son of Ramses the Great, Ramses II, Merneptah was the fourth pharaoh of the 19th dynasty. So at that point in time, we were already a particular nation. So skipping down, the nation of Israel was significant enough to be included by name among the other major city-states which were defeated by Merneptah in the late 13th century BC. This implied that Israel was a major player in the region during the late 13th century. So that's one of the things. So now it dates to about 1230 BC. The inscription contains a hymn and a list of the pharaoh's military victories. So we were already a strong nation. We weren't being just established as a nation, all right? We were already a strong nation, strong people. There's even further evidence prior to that, and that is the Israel Berlin statue pedestal relief. So this dates back even further, 1350 BC. So remember, BC dates go backward in time, contrary to our current AD dates. So now this is even older, looking at 100 years prior. And notice that it lists Ashkelon, Canaan, and Israel. So Israel could not have come into power, into play during the reign of Ramses. So, all right, so you're dealing with prior. We'll deal with, when we get into more of that history, you can deal with that's more so an anachronism, you know, when it comes down to the name. It's just another reference of a place from something else that we're referencing that happened at a earlier time. So I changed the name. This is what it is now, but it was a name something prior. So think about it like before they named over there on La Brea and Rodeo, before they named it to Obama. Before it was La Brea and Rodeo. So before they changed the name to Obama Boulevard, right? That's an anachronism. You reference something like if you're dealing with someone that came later, they would know it as Obama. Like these kids growing up, they would know it as Obama Boulevard. They wouldn't have known what it was before. But for us, we had that history. So that's where you're kind of dealing with as far as the change. Newer generations know it by this. Previous generations know it by this, all right? So let's continue. Let's go back, and let's go back to the papyrus of Ani. Getting back to 42 laws of Ma'at and the commandments. So this is another depiction of that papyrus, getting a closer look, and we got a good look. All right, so now this is blackhistoryheroes.com, and it says Kemet is the name of the native African people of the country, now known as Egypt, called themselves in their surviving writings. Many scholars refer to the people as Kemet or Kemet, whether it's KMT or Kemet. So now I'm gonna skip that one. So, also continuing on blackhistoryheroes.com, the Duat underworld is a place for judgment, is where the popular Kemet funerary scene of the Hall of Two Truths is depicting the various versions of the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the Papyrus of Ani, edited by E.A. Wallace Budge, all right? So in chapter 125 of the Papyrus of Ani, we find the petitioner, led by Anubis, into Duat and pronouncing his or her 42 affirmative declarations listed below from Budge's public domain translation of the 42 divine principles of Ma'at, which are very similar to the commandments. Which it should be, because at the end of the day, we have the same forefathers. So, of course, things are going to be similar. So if one really wants to argue which one's older, it all comes from the law, statutes, and commandments the Most High laid out. We just have the most recorded version of it. They just kept certain things and let go of others. But if you want to argue as far as was it plagiarized, things of that nature, there were 147 laws of Ma'at that were broken down to 42. 10 of them were taken to make up the 10 commandments. So that's not true. You'll see many things of that nature, you know, making those allegations. But other nations had laws. So let's read this from experienceagentegypt.com. So it says, although we have many historical records about certain crimes, criminals, and their subsequent punishments, we don't have any codified record of ancient Egyptian law and order. So they didn't have a particular actual code or legal code. So those were just a couple of confessions, admonitions, a couple of things to live by, but not actually a legal code. We, as Israelites, have a full legal code within our scriptures, contrary to what it is that the Egyptians actually had. So how can you take a people who did not have that and create a whole legal code from someone who didn't even have a legal code to begin with? So we actually had a full legal code. So now it reads, through the bits and pieces of information, we can gather some conclusions about how the legal system operated in ancient Egypt. So now, there was also ancient Egyptian wisdom literature, which offers us some insight on what good conduct was thought to be during certain periods, though these were not laws either. But before delving into the first part of the series about ancient Egyptian law, I think it's important to acknowledge this. The oldest surviving written legal code comes to us from amazing Mesopotamia. So notice that. Mesopotamia, not Egypt. The Code of Ur-Nammu is a set of tablets with laws written on them in Sumerian. They date from around 21,000 BCE. Also from Mesopotamia is the more famous Code of Hammurabi from around 1754 BCE. It consists of 282 laws and covers social and familial laws such as inheritance and divorce. All right, so now you get into other civilizations that actually had more of a legal code, an actual oldest legal code that you'd be looking at. So, which actually predate Egypt within itself. And as far with these regions, if you're curious, let's go back and get a look at where these regions generally are. So I'm dealing with Mesopotamia. Let's go back to history, and let's get Sumer and Mesopotamia. This is the region that you're looking at, all right? So the area of Sumer. So the area of Akkad, the Akkadian Empire. So that's what you're dealing with. You're also in the same region of Babylon, things of that nature. So of the Chaldees is also there. That's what you're dealing with as far as that Babylon or ancient Babylonian area. Not modern Babylon that will come up later, but ancient Babylon. So Nimrod and things of that nature. So this is what you're generally looking at. So let's go back. Now, notice, I guess I'll get this. We'll get a little bit of information. So now, we'll read a little bit of this, Genesis chapter 10 and verse 1. So now these are the generations, the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And unto them were sons born after the flood. Skipping down in verse 5. By these were the isles of Gentile divided in their lands, everyone after his tongue, after their families, in their nations. That's what you're dealing with. So now, and we'll get verse 8, and Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one in the earth. In the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, and Erech, and Akkad, and Calneh, in the land of Shinar. This is the land that you are dealing with here, the land of Shinar, the land of Sumer. So notice, you have that, the land of Babylon. You have this in the area of Akkad. So these are the things that the Bible is showing. These are the things that this map actually gives way to and showing. So now, we'll go back. So, and like we did with Nimrod's kingdom began in the Mesopotamian region, also known as or referred to as the land of Shinar. All right? So in Babylon or Babel just means confusion, as we get here in H0894. So Sumer was, the cradle of civilization. So the name comes from the Akkadian language, the language of the north of Mesopotamia. It means the land of civilized kings. So the Sumerians called themselves the black-headed people. So in their land, in a cuneiform script. So that's all I really needed from that. Let's go back, but just want to show you a couple of maps. Let's go back to Egypt. Oops, wrong history. Let's go back to Egypt. And we're going to go back to 42 laws of Ma'at. And we're going to continue back with other nations had laws, and continue here. So, like we said, the oldest surviving written legal code comes to us from the amazing Mesopotamia. Like we covered that general region, that Akkad area, Babylon, that's what you're dealing with. So, the code of Namu is a set of tablets. So, with laws written on them in Sumerian. So, Sumerian or cuneiform text, that's what you're dealing with. The cuneiform is the style of text. So, they date from around 21,000 BC. So now, moving on, so Ma'at's truth and justice. The basis of the ancient Egyptian legal system was Ma'at. Ma'at was more of a concept than a goddess. She was the representation of truth, justice, and order, both cosmic and social. In fact, during the weighing of the heart ceremony, the deceased were judged by having their hearts weighed against Ma'at's feather of truth, checking whether they had conducted themselves honorably during life. All right, that's what you're dealing with. And we'll get a little bit, so this is cuneiform text. This is what we're dealing with as far as the Babylonian king Hammurabi and the code of laws. This is cuneiform text. This is the style of it. So it gives a description of the laws. So just as we read before, the code of Hammurabi is an ancient preserved law code created in 1790 BC in ancient Babylon. It was written by the sixth Babylonian king Hammurabi. One newly complete example of the code is left today, inscribed on a 7-foot 4-inch tall in basalt steel in the Akkadian language. So now, the main form of government was a monarchy with one king. The king used governors to maintain order and control over different provinces of the empire. So you look at province as far as like regions or counties or things of that nature. So this is that particular stone. So being able to get a look at it. Look, lovely, lovely. All right. And moving right along. I think that's enough on that. All right. So we pretty much got the 42 laws of Ma'at. Understanding 42 laws of Ma'at come from the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which comes from the papyrus of Ani, all right, which dates to 1250 BC, still being in a place where it would be after the Israelites. Here's a little bit more on the Egyptian Book of the Dead in the Papyrus of Ani. So I'm going to go ahead and get a few more pictures. So some may have here, A. Wallace Budge also wrote the book on Egyptian magic, along with the Egyptian Book of the Dead. And of course, as we dealt with the Papyrus of Ani, this is a blow-up or more detailed version of the picture. And we'll get a few other things too. So just more details of the actual images, so you kind of see the pictures. We like pictures. All right, so that covers that. So now backpedaling. All right, so the next thing we want to deal with is that civilizations that predated Egypt. All right, so there's a few different civilizations that predated Egypt. Because some deal with Egypt that it's the oldest civilization in the world, no other civilizations, but as you notice, there's a few that predate it. So now, one, the Indus Valley civilization may predate Egypt's pharaohs. Ancient society is 2,500 years older than thought. So, the Indus civilization, and this is from dailymail.com, so their science category, so this is where it's from, dailymail.com. So, long story short, what I am going to get is the Indus people key facts. The Indus civilization, also known as the Haraparian civilization, thrived from 2600 to 1900 BC. So along with ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, it was one of 3 early civilizations of the old world. All right, so it was one of 3. Remember, Mesopotamia was one of the first civilizations known as the cradle of civilization. So the cradle of civilization, which I will cover more, let me go to history. Jerusalem, the mother of us all. When you're actually dealing with the creation, which I'm not going to go too far into this, but you're dealing with the Fertile Crescent, all right? So the Fertile Crescent represented a few different regions. Fertile Crescent is the region in the Middle East which curves like a quarter moon shape from the Persian Gulf through the modern-day southern Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Israel, and northern Egypt. The term was first coined in 1916 by the Egyptologist James Henry Breasted in his work Ancient Times, A History of the Early World, where he wrote, "This Fertile Crescent is promptly a semicircle, with the open side toward the south, having the west end of the southeast corner of the Mediterranean, the center directly north of Arabia, and the east end at the north end of the Persian Gulf." His phrase was widely circulated through the publications of the day, becoming finally the common designation for this region. The Fertile Crescent is traditionally associated in Jewish, Christian, and Muslim faiths with the earthly location of the Garden of Eden. All right, so that's what you're dealing with, the Fertile Crescent, which would be this area when you're looking at the Garden of Eden. So this is that area. This is the stretch of it. So that's where it makes sense, where you look at a lot of these early civilizations, you're getting come out of this area. Because you're dealing with, once again, where you see Elam, that's that East Indian area. So where they come from Elam. Sumer, Babylonia, that's where you deal with your ancient empires. Because once again, just dealing with ancient empire doesn't necessarily mean there weren't other nations. These were just some of the greatest civilizations of that time amongst all of Noah's descendants. So now, cradle civilization, same term or similar term. The term cradle civilization refers to locations where, according to current archaeological data, civilization understood to have emerged. Current thinking is that there was no single cradle, but several civilizations that developed independently. Why did you have several civilizations that developed independently or at the same time? Because you had a situation where, look at Noah's descendants. Where did they go? The areas of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So, of course, these areas started to develop about the same time, which is why you see multiple cultures at one point in time, but you have stronger empires because they became mightier. So now, going back. Get more of that information later. So, as we're saying, current thing is that there was no single cradle, but several civilizations that developed independently. With the Fertile Crescent, Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt understood to be the earliest, okay? Being the earliest, but Mesopotamia being actually earlier than ancient Egypt when it comes down to I would say what most people think, civilization or order or laws, things of that nature. But nevertheless, the long story short, or the end of it all, they all came about at the same time. They're all descendants of Noah, so it all depends which way you want to toss it. So if you want to toss it as far as all descendants of Noah, Shem, Ham, Japheth, absolutely that's the truth. But if you want to be like, nitpicking, Egypt came first, greatest one, nah, that's not true. So Mesopotamia, they actually came first, not Egypt within itself. All right, so now going back. More on that when I cover Go in Depth with the Garden of Eden and with Egypt and everything else. But what I probably will show, because some people may be wondering, because it does go back, with Egypt is actually the Garden of Eden. These are the dots when you look at those particular rivers. So this is this area. These are the 4 rivers as mentioned. So the Garden is stretched from Africa to Asia. So we look in the beginning civilization, when they say life started in Africa, that's half truth. Part of life, part of Africa, but wasn't just Africa. This whole area was the Garden of Eden. From Africa, the Middle East, Asia, this whole area was the Garden of Eden. Not what most people think, like Garden of Eden was just like right here. No, that's not true. That's not even all the land of Israel. This is all the land of Israel. The Garden of Eden is the whole land of Israel. What we got later on was reduced down to this little slither. But this is all the Garden of Eden, and this is all of our land. If you want to be technical, that's the land we'll get back later. So now, moving back, let's go back to Egypt. More on that as I get back with the Garden of Eden. So we covered the 42 laws of Ma'at, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, Egypt etymology. Let's cover some pyramids around the world. How much time I got? I'm going to go for a little longer. All right, this will be the last block I'll cover. All right, so world's oldest pyramids. Let's get into it. So one thing you'll find out, there's a lot of pyramids underwater, okay? So this is from the mindunleashed.org. You deal with a lot of underwater pyramids. So I'm going to get a few. This is one that's actually in Portugal. It says, Portuguese news report discovery of a very large underwater pyramid, first discovered by Diocelino Silva between the islands of São Miguel and Terceira in the Azores of Portugal. All right. So now, why are you finding these pyramids underwater? Ain't nobody building no pyramids underwater now, but all these things were covered due to the flood. So this also goes into, like, when I cover later on this month, dealing with the flood, which would be a few different parts too. This is how these things actually got underwater in the first place. So now, let's get a few other examples. So this is just another witness. This is from senhoracabo.com. So underwater pyramid discovered near Portugal. All right, so this is the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. So thought that the pyramids only belonged to the Egyptians and the Mayans. Well, think again, because a pyramid has been discovered within the region of Portugal. So a lot of time we deal with the pyramids, most people are most familiar with Egypt. But pyramids were also found in other places around the world. So it wasn't just Egypt that had this knowledge on how to build pyramids. Everybody at that time knew how to build pyramids. It was a normal thing. That's why you find them in places that are also buried under the sea. It wasn't something that was just solely known unto just the Egyptians or just African civilizations. So now let's get another one. This is National Geographic News. Japan's ancient underwater pyramid mystifies scholars. The district of Yonaguni officially owns the formations, and tourists and researchers can freely dive at the site. So now, how did pyramids end off the coast of Japan? Last I checked, that's not very close to Egypt at all. So once again, the pyramids was not something that was solely invented or came about with them. That's like me saying, so-and-so invented, making of a house. It ain't even a house. Everybody knew how to make a house. So things of that nature. But because you're not taught these things, it seems that this knowledge is just solely just these people, So it's not to take away from the civilization or empires that any particular kingdom or people built. It's just understanding that a lot of these things weren't just a knowledge or realm of knowledge that was just known to them. So that's going on. So some experts believe that the structure is called, could be all that's left of Mu, a fabled Pacific civilization rumored to have vanished beneath the waves. Wonder why. So how did it vanish beneath the wave when it was a civilization? And which we'll deal with all the flood story that all these nations have. All these nations understood there actually was a flood story. Even when we go back to Kush, let me actually get this. Now let's see, where did I put it? So let's get history, and let's get Sumer Mesopotamia, and let's get this. So the Sumerian king list and flood story, composed during the reign of Uti-Higil of Uruk, mentions Cush, Noah's grandson, Sumerian cuneiform, 2119 to 2112 BC. All right. So, and for more of that, when you want to deal with who was this guy, Uti-Higil of Uruk. So he was dealing with the Sumerian king list is a cuneiform document. So once again, cuneiform, the Akkadian language. So document written by a scribe of the city of Lachish sometime between 21,000 BC, like we just read over here. So the king list, just reading the highlights, the king list is thought to have been created to legitimize the reign of a king named Utu-Higil of Uruk. So two different sources confirming the same information. So so now, circa 21,000 BC, by showing him as the most recent in the long line of rulers of the region. So, and it says Etana is famous from the myth, but nevertheless. And going back. And let's go back to Egypt. I like my portfolio because I can just jump around for more information rather than having a PowerPoint. I can't jump around the way I need to access different things. Let's go back to pyramids around the world. And we're going to continue where we left off, dealing with pyramid right off the coast of Japan. So now, on hearing about the find, Kimura said his initial impression was that the formations could be natural, but he changed his mind after his first dive. So he said, I think it's very difficult to explain away their origin as being purely natural because of the vast amount of evidence of man's influence on the structures, he said. And that's a lot of times what happened. You see the evidence and you weigh it to where the proof is in the pudding. Obviously, this is something that didn't just come about naturally. It wasn't just spontaneous. It didn't just happen. It had to have been built and designed this particular way. So, but I'm not going to go ahead and read all that. Moving on, just want to get the highlights. So this is just more of it, Japan. So another source, ancientorigins.net, mysterious 10,000-year-old underwater ruins in Japan. So just got to get these confirmations. So now moving right along. So once again, news.com.au, Japan's Atlantis, the unsolved underwater mystery. How did it get down there? Well, I'll tell you how it got down to the flood. So now, this is another picture, things of that nature, of more just underwater pyramids and structures. So now let me go ahead, this back up, and bam. That back here, and go ahead and merge this back. So now, you see a lot of different pyramids, a lot of different structures underwater. Let's go ahead and let's continue, get back to these particular structures. So, next one. So we got the ones from Japan, and we are going to go back and get these other ones. So, ancient pyramids around the world. Oh, it's not. Let's go ahead and fix it this way. Not a problem. Just want to make sure everyone online can see. And then we'll see if we're good. We good? Let's go back. All right, it's connected now. So now, moving right along. So now the next thing that we want to go ahead and continue on with the pyramids. Let's actually go ahead, and one of the other ones I'll mention, you can write down the source. This is from smithsonianmag.com. So it's ancient pyramids around the world. It says, no matter if the civilization was Mesopotamian, Egyptian, or Mayan, its legacy today is in part marked by towering pyramids. All right, so that's one thing we'll find. So one of these is Chavan de Hunter, Peru. This is from the Chavan Temple Complex. So this massive complex was erected over the span of a few centuries by the pre-Columbian Chavan people who dwelled in the highlands of what is now Peru from about 900 to 200 BC. The monuments include both an old temple and new temple, made of rectangular stone blocks and shaped like flat-top pyramids. It incorporates elaborate carvings, passageways, and water channels that may have been used for religious rituals. Though now largely in ruins, the size of the complex imprisoned a 16th century Spanish explorer impressed a 16th century Spanish explorer so much that he believed it was built by a race of ancient giants, which a lot of time those things go back to. Every ancient civilization they try to equate to either aliens built it or, giants built it. Nothing ever, nothing ever really puts it in place to where they actually give way to it actually being Israelites or actually being other civilization that actually built it, but some sort of strange occurrence of some other people. So now, let's go ahead. Next one. And so these are ones you can write down. You also have Miori Sudan, the Nubian Pyramids. Oh, there we go. So this is one I was just talking about. Chavan de Hunter, Peru, Chavan Temple Complex. Right here. Bam, bam, bam. Thank you, ma'am. All right, Emerald Sudan Nubian Pyramid. So these are hundreds of pyramidal tombs in the region of central Sudan, once known as Nubia, built mostly out of reddish sandstone. About 40 of them are located in Marori, a major city in the Kushite kingdom, from about 300 BC to 300 AD. The Nubian pyramids are smaller than the Egyptian pyramids and more narrowly shaped. Although they have suffered from plunder and decay over the years, an Italian explorer smashed the tops of many of them in the 19th century. Apparently seeking treasure, they remain a remarkable sight. So more of these pyramids. And let's also get same little pyramids. All right, also Rome. So Rome, Italy, Pyramid of Cestius. All right, so right there, Pyramid of Cestius. You also have Uxmal, Pyramid, Mexico. This pyramid right here. Just gonna get kind of location and some images. You can kind of see, how that particular pyramid or structure actually looks. Then you also have the Great Pyramid of Cholula, Mexico. So this pyramid. Now, this actual whole area, this whole thing is a pyramid, not just this building on top. This building is part of the pyramid. So, Puebla, Mexico, Great Pyramid of Cholula. This is an older picture of the pyramid. So remember, just over time, it got covered with more brush to where it just looks like a dirt hill and a castle built on top of it. But nope, it's all a pyramid, dirt pyramid. You also this one, Ekbalam, Mexico. A lot of steps, but still a pyramid. They have Monte Alban Pyramids, Mexico. And these right here. You have this is Iraq, so in this legend, so once again, they went that Mesopotamia region. So this is a ziggurat, which is a type of pyramid. So the word ziggurat, from a Babylonian word for tall or lofty, you describe tieri temples like this one in Mesopotamia, so just like I mentioned. These are pyramids found in other places all over the world. So pyramids exist in other places outside of Egypt. All right, and then you also have Teotihuacan pyramids, Mexico. This pyramid. Should I say these pyramids? Not too bad. Also, same place. All right. Then you also have El Tajín, Mexico. So now these are all things that you can add to your repertoire to be able to show, others that, hey, pyramids are all over the world, especially in the region of America, throughout the Americas, where we know other nations weren't living, they would visit, but it was actually our people who were actually living here or decided to live here when they got out of their Assyrian captivity in around 732, 722 BC. So this is also Piton, Guatemala, Mayan pyramids of Tikal. And you also have Chichen Itza, Mexico. So these are some of the greatest and some of the largest civilizations around the world. So notice how many we're actually seeing in other places outside of America. Outside of Egypt, actually. And then you have Giza, Egypt pyramid of Khafre. One of the most notable ones that people actually see. And the world's largest pyramid, Egypt pyramid of Dosir. All right. So that pretty much concludes it. So we covered just a couple of things: the etymology of Egypt, so Egyptian Book of the Dead, the papyrus of Ani, civilization that predate Egypt. So when you're dealing with, especially like we covered, the civilizations of ancient Mesopotamia and ancient Babylon. All right. So pretty much dealing with those areas, and also the Indus Kush civilization as well. So we're pretty much dealing with Elam. So covering those things, as well as pretty much dealing with pyramids from around the world. So we'll cover more information later. So more on the Egyptian pharaoh, the pharaoh of the Exodus, more on Egyptian gods, the morality of Egypt, things of that nature, more of the chronology, because a lot of these things is very, very detailed to cover it. So less is more. So with that, I'm gonna go ahead and end this particular presentation. Just want you guys to get a gist of a few of the different things, but it's a lot of history and a lot of information. All right, so we'll just cover a couple of details, and then next time we'll get into a few more, and we'll continue with Israel archaeology, and there's so much as far as like all this with the Israelites in Egypt and all that, but this is really just a whole story with other things. So we'll just cover some quick facts, and hopefully you guys review that information, take notes. If not, go back, watch the video, get the references to add it to your own portfolio, so that way you can go ahead and share that information with loved ones, family, or save it in repertoire in case debates, conversations, things of that nature come up. So hope you guys learned something. I'm going to go ahead and end this presentation, all right? Cool. All right.